A few months back, I did a little live stream ranking all canon relationships in the Yakuza series. Please don't click off the video yet. During this live stream, I initiated the first part of my excellent deep state ruse to figure out what the fanbase, or at least the little corner of the fanbase I have access to, thinks of a certain Yoshitaka Mine. Not in the usual contexts we think of him in, as the final boss of Yakuza 3, but as one half of a pair across one Daigo Dojima. You've heard all the jokes, you've seen the memes, but have you read the text? Have you looked closer at what the game presented to us and considered it on a level beyond surface storytelling? For my money, a lot of folks haven't. So today we're going to answer it, once and for all. Does Yoshitaka Mine is gay? Wait, before we do this, let's clarify one important thing. I'm going off the original translation for the purposes of this video. In fact, I've always been doing that. Anytime I give any analysis of this series' writing, specifically for 1 through 5, I've been going off the earliest available translation, for better and for worse. Many would assume it's for the worse for Yakuza 3, but quite frankly, part of the goal of this video is just to get people to stop writing off the original translations before Zero as bad for no reason. If I can get all of what I'm about to show you from the PS3 translations, then at least someone has to admit that they aren't just shitty swearing compilations. But for the purposes of this video, I cross-referenced with the remaster translation to make extra sure of some details being present. I did not even glance toward Kiwami 3, except for a resource to give me some high-quality renders of the original Japanese subtitles so I could get some rudimentary translations of the original script. So here we go. Let's start things off with a simple question. Who is Mine, and what does Yakuza 3 tell us about him? Well, there are 12 individual cutscenes in this game, which include Mine, so we don't have too much to look at in order to get a simple impression of him. Upon a surface-level analysis, Yoshitaka Mine is a ruthless businessman who bribed his way into the Tojo clan and became immediately obsessed with the chairman, Daigo Dojima, because he treated him like a human being. At the end of the game, he dies sacrificing himself to kill Andre Richardson, the leader of Black Monday, an arms smuggling organization which Mine allied himself with in order to seize control of the Tojo clan. When you look at it like this, sure, Mine could easily have loved Daigo like a brother, an aniki, a kyodai, especially seeing as his oath to the clan was sworn specifically to Daigo. But if that's what we were here to do, this wouldn't be very much of a video, so let's ask a different question. What is Mine? Well, for starters, he's an orphan. We get 2 distinct stories of Mine's past, one from his mouth and the other from his heart. The easier one to speak about is the version he tells Kiryu before his boss fight. He was orphaned at a very early age, and he lived in squalor. He directly compares his living circumstances to survivors of World War II in Tokyo after the bombs dropped. It's because of these living conditions that he grew such an attachment to money, making its accumulation his only goal in life. The one we see directly from his memory tells a slightly different story, one that I think is more objective than his words. We see a very young Mine with a parental figure, excitedly running to him to brag about his score on a recent exam. He calls the man Oji-san, suggesting that this is either an adoptive father or perhaps the manager of the orphanage at which he lived. It isn't made especially clear, doubly so when the remaster changes the script from calling the man uncle to calling him dad. The Japanese word itself didn't change here, and the word for father is oto-san, something that Mine did not say. So I think it's safest to assume that this was the orphanage manager. Regardless, Mine only gives him a half-truth here, as he deliberately hides the fact that he was made fun of by his peers for being too poor to afford a baseball bat and glove, and so he wasn't allowed to play with them. Already, we can connect a few dots here. This game released early enough in the series to where I can trust the writers to know when they are writing a character who experiences one thing and says another. When Mine tells Kiryu that his poverty was comparable to war survivors, I'm sure on some level that that's based in the reality of Japanese orphans, but on the other hand, it could just as easily be Mine's recounting of that period of time exaggerating the extent to which he suffered. We get no indication of him going hungry, and he clearly had a consistent roof over his head at the very least. 2 very important distinctions I would consider when discussing the level of poverty a character is experiencing. What conclusion can we draw from this? Mine carries at least one extreme trauma with him, the trauma of being ostracized from his peers because of his financial status, and most assuredly of his familial status. This trauma shapes his perception not only of the world around him, but his own past. There's one more scene where Mine's past as an orphan gives us a lot that we can draw from, but I want to save that for later. We now have more details about Mine. He's a ruthless venture capitalist who was raised in squalor, and so he values money because he knows what it means to not have money. He grew up an orphan, and he carries severe trauma because of it. More importantly to our immediate character study though, he's a liar. In that flashback we see of him as a child, he's shown to obfuscate or even directly obscure the truth when it benefits him. He doesn't want to talk about his ostracization, so he lies to his guardian about what he got up to, which made him arrive home late. Do we see this anywhere else with his character? As a matter of fact, we do. Not necessarily in the lying sense, but in the sense that Mine is something of a social engineer. He knows how to navigate a conversation to make it go his way, and we see numerous instances of this clearly being a front he puts up that goes against his true feelings. For a simple example, when he brings Kanda's head to Kiryu as a way of, as he puts it, taking responsibility. The remaster translates this as holding himself accountable, but I find this translation lacking for a couple reasons. For one, Kiryu repeats the word sekinin back to him, a word which means responsibility. For two, accountability makes it sound more like Mine genuinely feels that he's at fault for what's happening, while taking responsibility sounds like he's stepping up to do something that needs to be done, regardless of fault. This reads more true to me considering he goes on to directly call Kiryu out, saying that if he weren't running off trying to play family man, none of this would have happened. He notes Kiryu's lack of responsibility when it comes to managing the Tojo clan. But this comes after his attempts at remaining civil. He lays out his plan step by step. He's going to smooth things over with the snake flower, he's going to rally the Tojo troops, and he's going to do everything he can to make sure that the clan survives this period of instability. When he tries to leave in good faith, Kiryu calls him out on his brutal methods. At that point, Mine drops the facade and speaks more directly. He makes a blatant threat at every man in the room, Majima included. Allies are not safe from his attempt at restoring the Tojo clan. And there's another thing Mine mentions here, which is Kiryu's hypocrisy. But again, I'd like to come to that later. There is another scene of Mine playing a role to make things work out in his benefit, and it's a relatively small part of a later scene. After reminiscing on his childhood, Katase, his secretary, comes in to bid him farewell before his trip to Okinawa. She expresses concern for Mine, to which he responds he'll take care of himself and not to worry. The final shot we see of him in this scene is of his face as he walks out the door, no longer facing Katase. His expression has fallen from the one he just put on for her, returning to the introspective, vaguely upset look he wore while he contemplated his past. This scene shows Mine is not just aware of how best to speak and act to get his way, it shows a noticeable level of control he has over his emotions and his expressions. So now we have a little more of a full picture of who Mine is as a person. He is an orphan, raised in squalor, who values monetary wealth above all else. He has supreme control over his emotions, and he uses his understanding of how people work to navigate the world in a way which best benefits his life. In asking who and what, we have in turn discovered some whys about him as well. Our image of the man is filling out more and more. But, of course, that's not all we're here to discuss. I want to reframe the analysis we've just done through a new lens, one which makes use of the context clues provided to make some assessments not about Mine's character, but his identity. Yeah, I know, we've already answered this question, but this isn't necessarily the same one I was asking earlier. What I'm now asking is, what sort of groups can Mine be classified under? Does what we've learned about him do enough to categorize him as anything beyond the assumed defaults for a character like him? Those, of course, being straight, cis, neurotypical. Well, for starters, we don't really get much reason to speculate on his gender identity. Mine presents and acts as a man both in front of others and for the camera. Nothing of what he does can immediately be read as standing in for transness, at least not from where I'm standing. Which leaves two other things to consider, his sexuality and his neurotypicality, aka whether he's autistic, clinically depressed, or anxious, things of that nature. I don't intend for the latter to be the focus of this video, so I won't speak on this for very long. But there are enough things worth analyzing from this lens that I want to at least open the conversation for other people to potentially continue in their own videos or essays or comment chains or whatever the fuck, however they so please. Mine exhibits some stereotypically autistic traits, specifically as a high-masking autistic person. Getting a little into my armchair diagnosis bag, his mastery over his emotional presentation could easily be read as an autistic trait. Perhaps Mine does not inherently understand the act of presenting emotions to others, so he does his best to emulate the way others outwardly convey them to him and uses that to his gain. On the other hand, he may understand emotions fine, but only feel the need to use his understanding of them for his own self-gain, seeing other people's emotions as irrelevant. From this perspective, he could be read as lacking empathy and only seeing others as a means to enhance his own existence. In Hollywood language, you've probably heard these traits referred to as sociopathy or psychopathy, but clinically speaking, most interpretations of those words fall under the label of antisocial personality disorder, minus the senseless violence, and this is something I feel is important to clarify. People with ASPD are often boiled down to unfeeling monsters, both by the mainstream media and now by the internet tumor that is true crime social media. Mine is someone who revels in violence, and he is someone who can be read as exhibiting traits associated with ASPD. This does not mean he is violent because he has ASPD. They are two independent elements of his character. Again, the focus of the video is not on the neurodivergent side of things, but as long as I want to bring up these topics, even if only for this little segment here, I want to avoid spreading this caustic narrative that possessing a mental disorder suddenly turns someone into a killing machine. PSA over, I just wanted to get that out there. Back on topic, other things I've noticed which make me think autism. Mine has a tendency to make direct and aggressive eye contact with people when he's trying to make a point, especially to people he doesn't know very well. I imagine most people are familiar with the opposite stereotype, that autists do not make consistent eye contact for one reason or another, but like many things in this world, autism is not a monolith. Many high-masking autistic people are aware that eye contact is a necessary part of social conduct, but do not know how much or how often. During his flight back to Kamurocho, for a somewhat on-the-nose example, when he's stabbing that guy who talked shit on Daigo, he grabs his head and forces their eye lines to meet. Only when he's done screaming at the dude does Mine let him go. For a less high-tension example, when he gives Kiryu head, he stares him down the entire time, making direct eye contact, either to judge Kiryu's reaction, or just to make sure he's looking where Mine— Oh! I meant when he gives Kiryu Kanda's head. My bad, gamers. Anyway, we can also see this in calmer moments, such as the executive meeting. When Mine chimes in to agree with Kashiwagi about bringing back Kiryu as interim chairman, he demands his full attention when he says he swore a direct oath to Daigo, and in any other circumstance, he'd want Daigo back, no matter what. The only person he doesn't exhibit this trait with is Katase, who we can only assume Mine already knows well enough to trust her to understand what he means. That, or he simply doesn't care whether she catches the nuances of his words. I lean towards the latter, personally, since he still feels comfortable manipulating her like he does everyone else, but it could easily be a mix of both. Closing the book on that lens of analysis, we now arrive at the main topic. We haven't gotten to the one scene yet, so how can I even have anything to say about this? That's what you're thinking, right? Well, here's the thing about queer readings. We didn't have openly queer text for, most of Western history. Queerness has been communicated in implication and subtext more often than it has been through open language. Admittedly, I'm not the most educated source for this information, but even today, some of the most celebrated queer characters are ones which have no officially stated sexuality. The same way many anthropomorphic cartoon characters are claimed as a certain race because of being coded a certain way, or because they possess the physical traits which could be used to associate them with a certain race, sexuality being invisible makes it all the easier to assign it to characters who are, again, coded in specific ways. So what kind of coding does Mine exhibit? For one, his complete uncaring attitude towards Katase. This one actually goes way beyond how he acts. The game itself is working to sexualize her, to emphasize both her physical attractiveness and her subservience to Mine as his secretary. It's very much trying to ham up this workplace romance vibe. Mine, though, is less than ambivalent to her advances. He straight up doesn't look at her for most of her very first scene in the game, the one where the game is screaming at the player, "Look how hot this babe is!" As mentioned earlier, when she does attempt to appeal to his emotions before he leaves for Okinawa, he does reciprocate, but only for as long as he's actually speaking to her. This is not the face of a man who actually meant those words, and more than that, he doesn't even look back at her. This is despite the camera itself turning back to look at her as he leaves, which is what allows us to see that his face does not convey the emotions he was just conveying to her. There's one more instance of Mine speaking to, or in this case, about women. And it's when he tells Kiryu at the end that his amassed wealth could have gotten him any woman that he wanted. This, I think, says the most about how he views them, not as people, but as objects of status. As said earlier, Mine is someone who's only able to see his own worth through the lens of financial wealth. Living in the world that he does, women are just another sign of status. And so I think that until the very end, he saw his secretary as another expensive item in his office. Does he view all women that way? Entirely possible. And considering that he's often shown in direct contrast to Kanda, a man that may as well be a living, breathing sex drive, I think there's something else that we can read into here. I don't think Mine cares at all about sex, which opens another potential door. We don't necessarily have to read him as gay. He may in fact be asexual, potentially aromantic given how little he values human connection in general. Two niches on a spectrum of queerness which often get overlooked in favor of the straight gay binary. But I'm gonna save the majority of that speculation for a little bit later, because for as important as that scene will be to discussing Mine's character, there's another potentially more important scene that I need to discuss first. Not for the sexuality thing, but for a whole other side of Mine we have yet to discuss. I'm going to skip the play-by-play of this one. We all know what happens in this scene. What I find most important to take note of is Mine's little speech to Haruka and the immediately following events. First of all, he walks directly up to the kids. Not the men on the ground, not to Nakahara watching everything unfold, not even to Haruka specifically. Mine approaches the crowd of children because what he has to say is for all of them. And this part I'll play verbatim because I think the wording of these lines is very important.
お前はこの施設が好きか? 俺はな、こういう大人に守られたガキを見ると無性に腹が立ってくるんだ。孤児だからって大人に守られて生きるお前らを見るとな、壊してやりたくなるんだよ。
First of all, Mine expresses a distaste for these orphans living in relative comfort. One could write this off as him reflecting the game's earlier characters who held somewhat caustic views on orphans, to put it mildly, such as the father of that bully kid. But there's more going on here than that. More than Mine simply hating the children for having someone take care of them, he resents them for it. The childish language of "it fucking pisses me off" suggests a sort of jealousy for their station in life. They have something he couldn't have, and he sees them as entitled because they must be relishing in living a better life than what he was afforded. And if he wasn't afforded comfort, then why should anyone be afforded comfort? Also, side note, I once again like this translation better than "it makes me sick to my stomach" because the latter suggests some kind of perversion of the natural order of things. In this one case, it isn't that deep. And I know it isn't because the original text is "it makes me inexplicably angry," which goes a million times harder than either of these translations does. Talking of, his final line, "you make me want to destroy you." This is where Mine lets something slip that we have seen evidence of for the entire game up to now. Mine embraces violence to some extent. We're introduced to the man with him punching a bag, not in any set pattern, presumably not doing any sort of drill, but just wailing on the thing. It can be presumed that he's either getting some aggression out or just doing it for the love of the game. Either way, Mine relishes in violence, and as the game goes on and his sanity slips further and further, he begins to see it as the default solution to his problems. He has Kanda killed to apologize to Kiryu. Later on, he'll stab a man through the hand with a butter knife because he said something that offended him. In this very scene, Haruka jumps up and slaps Mine across the face, to which his response is a brief smirk, but then the mask slips. His face contorts into an expression of pure malice before slapping Haruka back, harder, knocking her onto the ground. He then orders the orphanage destroyed, and he sits back and watches, the smirking visage regained as he ruins these children's lives. Mine cannot help but respond in this way to a show of force from someone he needs to perceive as weaker than him. These orphans are being raised in a way he wasn't, and now they're acting stronger than him? Those are two things there's no chance he could tolerate for longer than a second, because in his mind, being an orphan is being weak. And that's particularly important because Mine was an orphan. He still is, and he always will be. His burning hatred for these children, these orphans, he feels that for himself as well. How could he not? For so many of his formative years, he was like they were. Weak, defenseless, poor. It just happens that Mine was the one who had to pull himself out of that environment with his own abilities. At any moment, he could be right back there. So he constantly gains. Money, status, influence. He needs more all the time. It's all his life has ever amounted to. And I'm sure I don't need to spell this part out, but this idea of internalized hatred for a part of your identity, especially one that presents itself as outward bigotry and even violence, that's a pretty telltale sign of someone deep in the closet. Were Mine to accept and embrace his past as an orphan, he might be able to move past this perceived weakness and live an actually fulfilling life, not concerning himself with the way others perceive him. But Mine can't do that. Money is his identity, and more than that, it's his value, his worth, his strength. These things are certain. They're the last certainties he has in life anymore. But why is that? Because the only other certainty he used to cling to is gone. And speaking of that absence, it's about time we move on to Mine's final attempt at asserting his identity not only to Kiryu, but to us. Coming to this final set of scenes, we now have a lot more prior context that helps us see not just how and why Mine acts the way he does, but we can better read into the new revelations this scene gives us. The first big thing we learn about him is that this life of financial pursuit and luxury is entirely unfulfilling. We spend the entire game up to this point seeing Mine indulge in the finer things, fast cars, fine art, Gatorade, and even after he chastises Kanda for not being able to see the worth in all of that stuff he's breaking, we learn that none of it makes Mine happy. He still sees its worth, of course, objectively, his numbers are very high, but that doesn't mean his life is fulfilling. We can further read into this by extending not just to the financial part of things, but the sexual part. Being an object of women's fawning and interest, even that doesn't really mean anything to him. Why? Perhaps because he's not interested in women. Perhaps because he's not interested in anybody. Maybe he doesn't see the practical worth in having sex when his entire lifestyle revolves around making money. It could be any number of things, but a great deal of those things point to something that isn't heterosexuality. Another thing we can glean from this speech, Mine believes that people are inherently selfish creatures who lack loyalty. Here we get some context for why he calls Kiryu a hypocrite. It's not just that he claims to care about the Tojo clan, yet abandons it as soon as the chance arises, although that is a big part of it. It's that he claims to be an altruist. He does good things for people without expecting anything in return. Yet, on the inside, he is selfish. He seeks wealth and power, just like Mine does, just like everyone else does. At least that's what Mine thinks. He cannot perceive Kiryu as anything other than a hypocrite. He cannot deny his strength, or the good that he does, or the way others admire him. But he can make claims about whether Kiryu does these things for himself or for others. And he can destroy those good things that he does, identify the few objects that he can quantify as signs of Kiryu's altruism, and reduce them to rubble. He claims to do good, yet he can't actually back up his words. You say you run an orphanage, but actually I run over your orphanage. So, no you don't. I have already depicted myself as the wealthy Sigma, and yourself as the screaming, crying Beta. Mere hypocrisy. Of course, I don't need to tell you that's not how it works. But that hardly matters to a man whose entire worldview has crumbled not just once, but twice. And it's time we get to that now. Daigo Dojima. The one man who ever saw Mine as a human being, treated him with the same kindness a hypocrite like Kiryu would give to some undeserving orphans. But Daigo didn't donate to charity. He didn't indulge in worthless platitudes. He was nice. To Mine, someone who didn't deserve it, for no reason. There are a lot of very easy questions we could ask here. How can Mine be sure this kindness meant something? What separates Daigo from other men who would act kind to Mine on the surface only to stab him in the back later? What did Daigo even do to or for him that qualified as welcoming him with open arms? Those are hard questions to answer, but I think that last one gives us a bit of a hint. The PS3 and remaster translations keep this line verbatim. He welcomed me with open arms. He accepted Mine with no second thoughts. He saw who Mine was, what he was, and regardless of his lack of human experience, gave him a chance. If you want to read this as not having anything to do with anything, he trusted Mine, gave him a chance in the Tojo clan when there was every reason to do the exact opposite. Mine proved himself, of course, but that's not the part that matters. What matters is that Daigo had literally no reason to do that. There was no sign that Mine would provide him with some kind of profit, and even if Daigo was drawn to the money side of things, Mine swore a direct oath under him. A Yakuza partnered business is no alien concept. Mine could just as easily have entered a direct partnership with the Tojo clan. But he didn't. Mine didn't want a money-making opportunity. He didn't want to work with the Yakuza. He wanted to be a Yakuza. And Daigo let him. He swore up because Daigo trusted him to be more than a business partner. He went the extra mile for someone because it was a kindness that he had the chance to extend. Nothing like that could ever have happened in the ruthless capitalist hellscape that Mine had known for most of his life. This was a miracle that could only happen in a place where true bonds between men could exist. But that doesn't immediately answer why Daigo's near-death state would put bolts in Mine like it did. Yes, the man did him a kindness, and yes, he gave him an opportunity to be somewhere where he could form true bonds. He could form true bonds with any other Yakuza there, but presumably he didn't. We see his relationship with Kanda. He's not exactly fond of the guy, even before ordering his death, and he certainly didn't seem to give much of a shit about Hamazaki or Majima. Mine swore a direct oath with Daigo Dojima, and from there on, Mine idolized him. He liked him honestly, with no ulterior motives, because Daigo did the same for him. He loved Daigo. We have no way of knowing whether this part was reciprocated, but honestly, I don't think that part matters very much. Mine loved Daigo, and that was it. He saw him as the apex of mankind, something to strive towards, something to organize his whole worldview around. Bringing back the discussion of queer coding, again, we can look at this in two ways. One, Mine was crushing hard. He was led into a place where social norms are flipped on their head, a criminal place where right and wrong don't matter anymore, a place where men can form true bonds and no one judges your worth by how many women you sleep with. This also potentially answers why Daigo's kindness was different to everyone else's. It wasn't. It was just that it was Daigo doing the kindness. This also pairs well with the internalized hatred I mentioned earlier. This is a place where Mine no longer feels judged like he did on the outside. He's able to begin coming to terms with who he really is. 2, and this one overlaps with the interpretation of Mine as having antisocial traits, enough to not see other people as people, Daigo's act of kindness towards Mine is the first time since childhood that he's felt any emotion for anyone that's not disgust or hatred. This sparking of an emotion in Mine quickly spiraled into obsession, and if we consider him Arrow Ace, this would probably combine with said antisocial tendencies to make Daigo the first person Mine has felt anything positive for that isn't a guardian. His brain is going absolutely haywire, assigning any and all positive relationship statuses to Daigo. Mine loves him like a friend, a partner, a parent, an idol, any and all of the above. Hey, I never tried to claim he was well-adjusted. More than that, I think Mine is deeply damaged, and a person like him being met with kindness is absolutely liable to suddenly think that the world revolves around the only person who's done anything good for him. And now that person is gone. Well, not quite gone, but consider the one other person he loved who died on him, his guardian, the one who slowly wasted away in a bed until he was dead. Now Daigo's in the exact same circumstance, only this time he can't even reassure Mine that things are going to be okay. Mine is someone who lived in one very specific way for most of his life, until he met one person that challenged that. He could live with being wrong because Daigo was there to prove that there was more to life than being wrong. But now Daigo isn't here to ground him. Mine was wrong twice over. He can't see this as anything else. Daigo is dead. And not just dead, something worse. Daigo is weak. He wasn't shot to death, yet he isn't strong enough to be truly alive. The one insurmountable evil in this world, the one Mine spent his whole life running away from, weakness, has overtaken Daigo. He was never strong. He was always fallible. And Mine loved him. He let him into his heart. He let Daigo become a part of him. His life revolved around the man. And now Daigo's dead. He was weak, and he died. And Mine wanted to be him. Every single crumbling part of Mine's psyche, which may or may not have been healing with Daigo's influence, has now lost all of its support. He's collapsing on the inside. He's regressed back into the one objective mark of self-worth. Even if it's something that doesn't make him happy at all, it makes him something. And more than that, he seeks the Tojo clan's chairman spot. He still wants to be Daigo, no matter what. He's just reframed it as falling under his previous worldview that made enough sense to keep him alive. This also helps explain his quickness to violence, as it is one of the few inarguable marks of strength in a criminal world. A man will not step to you if you kick out his knees from under him. You don't have to take insubordination from a corpse. But still, Kiryu argues with Mine. Daigo isn't dead, he's clinging to life. He's fighting. That strength cannot be ignored. At this point, Mine isn't even feigning sanity anymore. He's actively falling apart. Even in his vocal performance, he's bouncing between calmly explaining his rationale and screaming his lungs out. He shoots at Kiryu, but cannot bring himself to kill the one man Daigo idolized, the one thing that's left of him in this world. Yet, for the life of him, he cannot understand why Daigo would love a hypocrite. Someone who claims to live like Daigo does, yet clearly doesn't. He's like Mine, weak on the inside, yet he doesn't work to make up for that weakness. He acts like he cares about others, but he isn't Daigo, so he's lying. How can Daigo love him? Kiryu asks Mine if he hates the people he grew up having to deal with. Of course he does. Those selfish pricks only care about money. He'd kill him given the chance. Of course, this is how he's come to deal with anyone he doesn't like. But then Kiryu says something else. He understands why everyone leaves Mine in the end. He's just like them. All he cares about is money. That's why no one loves him. It's because he's never loved anyone. This moment is probably one of the least impactful on your first playthrough. Like, no duh. Mine is just like everyone he hates. He's the hypocrite. He's projecting. That's the lesson. That part is obvious. But it's what comes after that's come to stick with me now. Kiryu asserts that Mine has never loved anyone. Even if you believe that he only cares about Daigo because he got attached to the first person to show him kindness, that's still not true. Mine did love someone. We saw as much from his own memory. His guardian, his father, whatever you want to call him at this point, Mine clearly loved him as deeply as he would a biological parent. But Kiryu doesn't know that. How could he when the most Mine told him just now is that he was an orphan? I think this is the final tipping point for Mine, the thing that sort of breaks his brain. His gaze falters here, his gun arm is shaking. He doesn't look enraged anymore, he looks sad. He knows Kiryu's wrong, but how could he explain? He's not about to divulge that part of his past to someone he hates. God knows if he even told Daigo that much about himself. That was his very first mistake, loving a man who was too weak to live, to take care of him. But he still loved him, and I think that very first and only love he felt before Daigo is a part of his sense of weakness, his internalized hatred. He loved the only person who treated him with kindness, and then that person died. Now he's gone and done it again. And Kiryu has the gall to say that he's never loved anyone. The only things Mine can do at this point are scream and shoot, but to no avail. And I think Kiryu recognizes that part too. And that's why he skips to the strip. Kiryu removes his top and bares his soul to Mine. He doesn't turn around and show him the tattoo. It would be absurd to turn his back on a man with a gun. But he makes it clear that he's not hiding anything. He's not a hypocrite. This is who he is, and he's going to show Mine that he's wrong, no matter what. Mine, too broken to think of an actual argument, not to mention being physically challenged, one way he can prove his objective strength over Kiryu, agrees. And he reveals his soul to us, the Kirin, a creature of such supernatural elegance and grace that it treads not upon a single blade of grass as it roams the earth, yet defends itself by breathing holy fire when attacked. A creature that only appears in lands ruled by enlightened, benevolent leaders. You could call it a Japanese unicorn, haha gay. But more important to this discussion, I think it's Mine's ultimate expression of loyalty to Daigo. He swore up directly under him. And of course it would be relevant to mention Daigo's Irezumi, the Akala, guided by the wisdom of an ancient celestial dragon. Even on a soul level, Mine is competing with Kiryu for Daigo's affection. And consider that we see a direct parallel to this when Kiryu takes Rikiya to get his tattoo from Udabore. I could talk more about Kiryu and Rikiya and how Mine's ultimate revenge on Kiryu was taking Rikiya away from him, but at this point, I think it would be better to just stay focused and get to the end of things. Mine loses. He loses real bad. His weakness is reaffirmed, but he's at peace with it, which, of course, he takes as a sign that his world is ending. But Kiryu reassures him it's never too late to change. He's weak, but he isn't dead. Then Katase calls him, clearly flustered, with Mine assuming she's worried about him. But no, just another financial matter he needs to resolve. While Mine is, of course, betrayed by this subversion, he doesn't lose his mind over it. He simply hangs up, looking straight at Kiryu while he does. Surrounded by proof of his wrongness, proof of his weakness, he comes to the realization that he'd been putting off for his whole life. People seek out companionship, yearn to trust others, and be trusted by others. Mine has lived a miserable life, but that doesn't mean life is miserable. There is hope. There is reason to go on. But, of course, it's easier to say that than actually mean it. It's very easy to say you've internalized a life lesson. The hardest part is to keep going. And unfortunately, Mine is then given an excuse not to keep going. Black Monday has come for him, like he knew they would, but in his moment of weakness, when even Kiryu is helpless to save the both of them, Daigo steps up and protects them. He fights strong enough to save all three. Kiryu was right, and Mine was wrong. Daigo is alive. Daigo is strong. And Mine was about to throw everything away because of his inability to trust him. Because of his weakness. Kiryu was right. He wasn't, of course, that's not the relevant factor here, but how else is Mine supposed to take this sequence of events? His world is overturned, then tossed back on its head twice over, and then the one person who makes everything make sense suddenly returns to his world when nothing is how it's supposed to be. Some wires are going to get crossed somewhere. But then Andre gets back up, and suddenly there's a way to make things right. Or at least as close to right as they can be. Kashiwagi is dead. The Tojo clan has lost all of its major figureheads, save for Daigo, who only just got out of a coma. Kiryu's life is in tatters, and Daigo's about to learn that all of this is Mine's fault. But now, Mine can protect the man he loves and the man whom that man loves, honor his oath to his chairman and his clan, take responsibility for his and Black Monday's actions. Daigo begs him to stop, but Mine puts it bluntly. He doesn't deserve to be with Daigo. In literal terms, he doesn't deserve to back away from the edge of the roof. And in real terms, he doesn't deserve to be with Daigo. He thanks Kiryu for meeting him, wishes it could have happened sooner, reassures him that he's going to end this according to his principles. But his last words are to both men.
生まれ変わったら俺もそっちに入れるかな。やめろ。やめるんだ。ミネ！ミネ！ Let me go!
This wasn't a sacrifice. This was seppuku. Suicide. Mine took his own life in a desperate attempt to make amends for what he had done. The important part wasn't killing Andre Richardson. It was killing himself. Daigo is, to put it mildly, very confused, but he's got enough of an idea of what's going on to put two and two together.
ミネだったんですか。
いや、違う。あいつは、ミネは裏切り者なんかじゃない。
So that's Mine. An orphan, a businessman, a schemer, a murderer, a weak, scared man, but above all, a human being, capable of love and capable of being loved. But to end the video here would be a great disservice, because for my money, that wasn't the end of Mine. No, he left a great and lasting impact. On the fans, of course. Mine has been a beloved character ever since his inception, and that love caused RGG to make the biggest mistake in studio history. But putting that aside, there's one more thing that we have to discuss. The last impact Mine left on the world. On one man. One Daigo Dojima. So in Yakuza 5, there's this big stupid conspiracy going on that rocks the entire foundation of the Tojo clan. It's a Tuesday, who could have guessed? In order to help combat this, Daigo ends up making the rounds across the entire country. He establishes his connection with Yakuza clans and families in Fukuoka, Sapporo, Osaka, and Nagoya. However, he doesn't do this all on his own. To my memory, he visited 2 locations in person in order to get his work done. First, he went to Nagasugai in order to speak with Yamagasa, but also to speak with Kiryu, who had been exiled to there by the worst person ever. Ideally, he would have been able to bring Kiryu back into the fold, but Kiryu isn't able to help. Daigo accepts the situation and resolves to figure things out himself. After this, he has one more place he needs to go. Kinecho, Nagoya. What's in that town? The Nagoya family, for one, a secret syndicate dedicated to protecting the town from outside influence. But there's something else there, something that Daigo wants to personally make sure gets his attention. Or rather, someone. Tatsuo Shinada, the Wyvern's sacrifice fly, the man whose dream was stolen from him in order to protect the town of Kinecho. But more relevant to this discussion, the bearer of every student's dream at Kamuro West High School in the summer of 1993. That year, Daigo threw away his status as valedictorian to protect Shinada and the rest of the baseball team from Kamuro Tech's attempt to keep them out of the regional finals. It's entirely thanks to him that Shinada managed to pull the team through and make it to nationals, where his home run would be the only hit his team managed to get off Sawada, Shukyo High School's pitcher. Of course, Shinada and Sawada would go on to have their own little rivalry in the future, but we're focusing on Daigo right now. He tells Shinada outright that his dream was to see him move forward in the tournament. He fought off a gang of rival school thugs and got himself expelled from Kamuro West just to see Shinada's dream come to fruition. And he was watching the game from juvenile court. Again, let's ditch the lofty dialogue and see this for what it is. Daigo idolized Shinada, entrusted something he cared about more than anything to his capable hands, and sacrificed everything he had to make sure Shinada would be able to attain it. And not only did he do that, he remembered it years later. He made an explicit effort to track Shinada down in Kinecho so that he would be able to help him overcome the depression he'd been wallowing in since his expulsion from professional baseball. He gave Shinada the push he needed to expose the Yakuza connections tying the Nagoya family down and find out the real reason why his dream was stolen from him. Of course, we know what happens from here. Daigo oversteps. He gives Shinada more than enough money to settle his debt and get back on his feet. He tells Shinada that he can reinstate him with the Pro League, that where he's going is too dangerous for a civilian. Shinada's gotten enough closure to reclaim what he's lost. He tries to give Shinada's entire life back to him. But Shinada won't accept it like that. The Yakuza stole his dream, and now a Yakuza wants to give it back, as if that makes it right? His life story is his own to write. And so he takes his life back into his own hands, takes a stand against Daigo, and proves his worth. Daigo, upon seeing this display of inner strength, is moved enough to let Shinada do what he wants. And so, Shinada follows the narrative of the game through to the end, at least until he's given a call from the people he loves and told to come back home. Circling back though, Daigo's entire inclusion here is a bit of a forced one, even by Yakuza 5 standards. This one bit of the story didn't really mean much to me back when I first played this game, and I imagine it doesn't for most people. Shinada is the focus of Part 4 as a whole, and especially this boss fight. Daigo's mostly just here to facilitate Shinada's life-affirming narrative. But after having done all this reading into Mine's psyche, read all of his thoughts about Daigo, I think that this one scene is the most important factor in seeing that Mine was right. Daigo, a directionless youth who knew his future would be in the Yakuza no matter what he did, wanted to do something to help those around him. His altruistic nature demanded that he not rest on his laurels, and so he did not. He threw away his academic future, which itself may not have meant anything, but he did so with the sole purpose of helping Shinada's dream come true. And I think following this train of thought not only tells us about why Daigo made such an explicit effort to help Shinada in person, it gives us the other half of the story between Mine and Daigo. We're sort of entering headcanon territory here, but I think that even if you want to divorce the gay undertones from what I'm saying, this creates a compelling enough narrative to justify its existence. Obviously, Daigo was going to learn the full extent of Mine's obsession with him and the reasons behind his suicide. That got him thinking. A person living this much of a lie, getting so close to happiness only to have it stolen from him at the height of his life, now damned to live in the shadow of what could have been. Does Daigo know anyone else like that? Of course he does. Tatsuo, the guy he knew from high school, the man he sacrificed his surface life for in order to see that his dream, and the dreams of everyone else at Kamuro West, would be seen through to the Koshien Nationals. If he cared enough to watch Koshien from the juvie court, he would absolutely have cared enough to watch Shinada's pro career, see him hit his first home run, watch the fallout of what would happen afterwards. Who knows, between that and Kiryu, killing his father, maybe that's why he ended up in such an emotional spiral, culminating in his arrest in 2001. Shinada's big ordeal happened in '99, which is a lot closer to when that arrest actually occurred than Dojima's murder in '95. Of course, he can't just make up an excuse to go to Kaneicho himself to check up on the guy, but then the excuse finds him. Kurosawa's scheme in 2012 to consolidate every Yakuza organization in Japan under the Omi Alliance. Daigo makes his move to Nagoya, both to find out which leg of the Omi is operating here, and to check on Tatsuo, make sure he's alive, and do everything in his power to give him his happiness back. He's not about to lose someone who meant as much to him as he did to Mine. So now we're back at this scene. Daigo reveals himself to Shinada, confessing his past and his motives for helping him. He tries too hard to fix every problem Shinada has, but then Shinada pushes back. The two begin fighting, and during the scuffle, Daigo realizes something. He's not trying to save Shinada anymore. He's trying to save someone he's already lost. And in realizing this, Daigo finds his own closure for what happened 3 years ago. That's why he lets Shinada win. He's not who Daigo was trying to pull back from the edge. And now, with this closure gained, Daigo feels safe letting Shinada into his life in this little way. And the game is not shy in telling us that Daigo's feeling a little deja vu here. Who knows, maybe Shinada does share one crucial thing in common with Mine. Maybe Daigo wasn't the only one with a high school crush. How do I know all this? The answer is in the music. Not the boss theme we in the English-speaking world have heard, but those on the domestic front. Wild Romance is a bit of a conundrum for most Yakuza fans. For the life of them, they cannot figure out why this, of all songs, was the boss theme for Daigo in Yakuza 5. Maybe they just needed a licensed song to fill in a gap where they thought one would be needed. Maybe it was a joke? I offer a different answer. This song isn't for Shinada proving himself to Daigo. At least, it isn't entirely that. Someone else is being spoken to in these lyrics, if we take them to be from Daigo's perspective. I'm going to read you the first chorus verbatim. When the knives from the wind pressure have cut up the dark sky, the stars you didn't see will come falling out. Let your tears shine. Be proud of this life. Feeling hurt isn't a sign of weakness. Please tell me you'll absolutely not lie to yourself. Your being so hard to approach is the reason I fall in love. Now, am I positing that the reason for Daigo's involvement in Kaneicho during the events of Yakuza 5 is because he's trying to make amends for, in his mind, letting Mine die during the events of Yakuza 3? Am I suggesting that Mine was, in fact, Daigo's retroactive gay awakening, and that explains why his only scene with a woman who isn't his mother is looking absolutely miserable in a hostess club at the beginning of Yakuza 2, as well as contextualizing Shinada as his high school crush that he wants to seek out to make sure he can save the life of somebody he loves, since he wasn't able to love Mine until it was too late? Was this whole video building up to my Shinadai fanfiction? Yes. Happy Pride Month, everyone. From yours truly, the bisexual and non-binary YouTube guy, Maxwell Painwell. I hope you have a good day. Take care of yourself. Be proud of this life.